Hello everyone and welcome. My name is Dan Sampaio and I'm delighted to welcome you to today's Mondac webinar in association with Freshing Fields Law, which will deliver you a practical guide to doing business in Nigeria. Joining me today is the wonderful Frederick Intido. Fred is a dual qualified Nigerian and UK solicitor. He has over 2 decades of practical experience in the corporate, commercial, anti-bribery and anti-corruption, energy, litigation, employment and labour, shipping, government, regulatory and compliance practice areas. He has and continues to advise international and local businesses on all aspects of establishing their operations in Nigeria through obtaining all requisite government and regulatory approvals to interfacing with government agencies. Now, before I hand over to Fred, a housekeeping item: you are able to submit questions to Fred today by typing your question into the panel on the right-hand side of your page. You can send in your question at any time, and we'll endeavour to answer as many as possible during our Q&A at the end of today's presentations. If you do find that your question was left unanswered, we will be in touch with you after the session, but we also encourage you to reach out to Fred yourself. It's now my pleasure to hand you over to Fred to begin. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dan, for the introduction. Good afternoon, good morning to all of you who have joined this webinar today. It's indeed a pleasure to have you here. I do hope that our time together will be quite stimulating. The theme of our webinar today is a practical guide for companies in Nigeria doing business, anti-corruption, and bribery. I guess you must be wondering why we are having these focus on Nigeria. So perhaps the first place to start in our discussions this afternoon is to look at the question, why is Nigeria even a place of interest? Why are we interested in Nigeria as a business destination? Now, there are several reasons why Nigeria is such an attraction for businessmen and women and companies all over the world. The very first is that Nigeria has abundant resources in terms of solid minerals, agricultural products, and that particular product in which we are one of the world's largest producers, crude oil. Nigeria has tin, iron ore, coal, a part of the solid minerals. We have agricultural products such as cocoa, cashew. It's numerous, and we also equally have a thriving textile and leather industry, which makes it just an attraction for those who are coming to invest in Nigeria. Again, another reason is that Nigeria is politically stable. Every businessman or woman will look for an environment that has stability. So since Nigeria returned to civil rule in 1999, we have had that solid democracy. Currently, there are crises in several areas in terms of banditry, kidnappings, and some other such things, but it hasn't really affected the political stability in Nigeria. Next slide, please, Aaron. Yes, so apart from the abundant resources which Nigeria has and its political stability, Nigeria also boasts of attractive incentives which the government has put in place to encourage investment in the country. And the package itself is such that you are granted tax holidays, pioneer status, when you come to invest in any of these sectors that I have mentioned previously. Nigeria enjoys a free market economy where you are able to engage in whatever business you want to engage in, so long as it is within the ambit or purview of what has been provided for legally in the country. And a lot of structures have been put in place by the government to ensure that you can conduct your business in a very seamless, manner. Another reason why Nigeria is such an attraction for investment is that it's a fast-growing economy. Between the years 2000 to 2014, it averaged a GDP of about 7%. Even with all the crisis we've had as a result of COVID-19 from 2020 to the present time 2022, Nigeria has still managed to average a GDP of 3.98%, so which is quite good in the present circumstances. Two more reasons why you need to look at the Nigerian market in terms of doing business. Aaron, if you'll move to the next slide, please. Yes, so Nigeria has very strong banking and financial sector, and that has improved since the banking reforms took place in Nigeria in 2006. So there is that guarantee that once you come into the Nigerian market, you're very assured that banking and financial infrastructures are very well in place. Nigeria has an extremely lucrative telecommunications, market. It is one of the sectors in the country which is experiencing or has experienced quite, a huge boom and turnover for the past 2 decades when the telecoms market was liberalized. And perhaps the most important reason why Nigeria is such an investment destination is that it has a large consumer market. Currently, Nigeria's population is about 216 million, give or take, a plus or minus, and it has 70% of its present population under the age of 30. So that gives quite a huge consumer base for any business that is coming into Nigeria. Your products, your goods, your services will surely have a ready market. Next slide, please, Aaron. So the very first thing we will need to look at in terms of our discussion on the anti-corruption, money laundering, and bribery landscape in Nigeria is to look at what some might say is a rather mundane matter of the steps to take in doing business in Nigeria. It is key, it is critical, even though it might appear elementary, that you must register your business with the Corporate Affairs Commission, which is like the company's registry. You must ensure that you complete all your tax registrations. You must obtain all necessary licenses and permits, which is very critical. You must ensure that you have all your required documentation when you're applying for licenses. Why is this important? Usually where we begin to have issues around corruption, bribery, having to give something in order for you to gain an advantage is where you perhaps do not have complete documentation, and that might allow yourself to be exposed to being extorted or leveraged by unscrupulous government officials. It's key for you to ensure that you apply for your licenses and permits in good time so that you are not faced with the pressure that comes from your having to rush in order to meet a particular timeline. And very importantly, you must conduct your advanced due diligence on potential partners and service providers. That is very key if you are going to be starting on a very safe footing. You must ensure that whoever you're going to be partnering with in Nigeria is one who does not have any skeleton in their cupboards or closets. Yes, Aaron, we can move to the next slide. Thank you. Yes, so we come to the interesting subject itself, or the topic itself. What is corruption? I'm sure we all know what corruption is, even though we might not be experts or specialists in the area itself. The World Bank has given us perhaps a very useful and helpful definition of corruption, which is the abuse of public office for private gains. And this happens in quite a wide array of areas. So, but that is itself a very helpful definition: the abuse of public office for private gains. So we will see the various aspects and areas in which this definition itself comes to play. Thank you very much, Aaron. The next slide. Yes, so as we talk about what corruption is, it is good to have, at the back of our minds or in front of our minds, the fact that corruption has such a huge cost. Now, I'm speaking not just specifically about Nigeria, but corruption on a global, scale, where it is estimated that between 1.5 and $2 trillion is lost globally to corruption. Money that is given to government officials, public officials, in order to be able to gain certain advantages. But the thing about the cost of corruption is that it is not just expensive for the person who is involved in the corrupt practice, whether you look at it on the part of the public officials who are encouraging it or who are being compromised, but it has a huge cost on the part of the individual who is involved, the company that is involved, because you get to pay more often than not a lot more in fines to the various government agencies that are in charge of monitoring and enforcing the various legislations. Next slide, please, Aaron. Thank you. Yes, so Nigeria, as I have said, at the very beginning, is such a very interesting, country. Apart from the fact that it's the most populous in Africa, apart from the fact that it has one of the world's largest reserves of crude and gas resources, Nigeria has had these perennial struggle and problem with the issue of corruption. Almost on a yearly basis, when the Transparency International comes up with its ranking, Nigerians hold their breaths because you're not sure where you're going to appear on that particular ranking itself. The 2021 ranking, Nigeria placed 154 out of 180 countries that were, polled. But the good thing is that in the last 2 decades, Nigeria has been tackling corruption frontally. And how has that been done? It's been done through a suite and array of legislations, which have been specifically aimed at addressing the perennial problem of corruption in the country. The next slide, please, Aaron. Thank you. So, like I said, Nigeria, is such an interesting country when it comes to the subject of corruption. And why is it interesting? It is because we have so many legislations and regulations which deals with the subject of corruption. And it will interest you to know that there is no aspect of corruption, bribery, money laundering, white-collar crime, whatever might be the distinction, the variation, the nuance that has to do with a particular act itself, Nigeria seems to have a legislation which addresses those specific areas. So it's a good thing in itself, even though it is unwieldy, as some will say, it having so many different legislations which sometimes crisscross and overlap in terms of their application. Well, the well-known legislation which deals with corruption, money laundering, bribery in Nigeria is the EFCC, the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, Act. A lot of people are familiar with the EFCC because they are the more visible agency which is saddled with the statutory and regulatory powers to enforce the corruption legislation. So we have the Independent Corrupt Practices and Other Related Offences Act, which deals more with corruption in public sector. So like the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission deals with corruption both in the private sector, in the public sector, but the ICPC is much more localized to the public sector. So like I said, several legislations that has to do with advance fee fraud, money laundering, corrupt practices, which has to do in terms of the behavior of public officers and all that. Next slide, please, Aaron. Yes, so again, you will see from this slide that, like I did mention, the regulations are quite a lot. It's key for me to mention this particular act itself, the Nigerian Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, Act. That is one statutory body that has a very interesting, role in the Nigerian oil and gas, industry, where they have the statutory responsibility to ensure that there is fiscal integrity and prudency on the part of companies which are involved in the extractive industry. That's the oil and gas exploration, companies. Perhaps a little bit more, on that. So Nigeria has a Freedom of Information Act, which makes it mandatory for government bodies, government officials to provide any individual who so requests within the provisions of the law itself for information relating to specific act or government business. So it is very key because that ensures that there is transparency and there is that access by individuals to information when they need it. So those are the legislations there deals again with corruption, bribery, and the other matters in their respective areas. Next slide, please, Dan. Thank you. Aaron, thank you. Yes, so we all know that corruption is not just a localized problem for Nigeria. It's a problem which virtually every country faces. The only difference being perhaps the degree or extent to which such, it's a problem itself. So the United Nations, thankfully, has this convention against corruption, and Nigeria is a signatory to that particular convention, is ratified it, and so the Nigerian government, the Nigerian authorities do know that in the process of enforcing and implementing its anti-corruption laws, it is doing that because it knows that it has a standard, a global standard that's set by the United Nations, which it is following. Next slide, please, Aaron. And in similar vein, the African Union, on the back of what the United Nations has done, also has its anti-corruption convention, which shows again that corruption is not being fought at the global or the regional level, but it is also one which impacts strongly on the national level. as we're looking at in the case of Nigeria. Next slide, please, Aaron. Yes, so it's good to note that in addition to those suite of legislations which I referred to earlier on, that shows that Nigeria is indeed quite serious about fighting corruption from a legislative and a regulatory perspective. The Companies and Allied Matters Act, which was passed in 2020, and that itself was a significant, event, because after several decades of having the same Companies Act, some far-reaching amendments were made to the Act itself. And one of the amendments which was done there is the one which makes it mandatory for the beneficial owners of companies to be known. So that in itself ensures that you cannot possibly hide under certain individuals or proxies in whose name you might be setting up, your company and all that. It brings the whole thing up and out into the public domain. But the only drawback with that is that it is talking about publicly owned companies, but we still have the issue of privately owned companies, which could also be a conduit through which a lot of corrupt practices might take place. In Lagos, I'm sure those of you who are listening to me who are familiar with Nigeria, you know that Lagos is the commercial capital of the country. And in this regard, the governor of Lagos State has, signed into law what you might say a state-focused anti-corruption legislation, which will ensure that the state is able to prosecute corruption within the public sector itself at its own level. The way it is in Nigeria is that corruption is mostly prosecuted at the federal level. So what the Lagos state government has done perhaps might be a pointer as to what is to come and what others might begin to copy. Next slide, please, Aaron. Yes, so another interesting thing which happened in Nigeria regarding the anti-corruption landscape is that the president of the country, Muhammadu Buhari, signed into law on the 12th of May 2022 the Proceeds of Crime Recovery and Management Act. And now what that does is that it enables this particular body, which this act itself or law itself sets up, to be able to trace, to follow, to locate, to search, to discover, to impound, to acquire the various properties that might be the results of corruption, which might have been acquired through corrupt means. That in itself is significant, because one of the major challenges that the anti-corruption war has faced in Nigeria is that when properties are recovered as from those who have been involved in corruption, the question always is, what happens to what has been recovered? What happens to the individuals who have had these things in their possession? Who manages these recovered properties? There has always been an unpleasant dispute or controversy as to how that is handled. But just to say on this point that even with the passage of these acts, the two major bodies which are responsible for the fight in corruption, the corruption fight, the EFCC and the ICPC have not been too particularly enthused or pleased about this new development, because for them, it seems to create additional bureaucratic bottleneck to have another body apart from these bodies that have been involved in the administration of this particular law itself. Next slide, please, Aaron. So again, I'm sure that we all, are aware of the fact that anti-corruption, anti-bribery, money laundering, it's a fight that has been going on for quite a long time, and it is good to know that there have been quite a lot of international enforcement actions. Any attempt to do a search on Google will throw up very well-known cases where, particularly with the United States Department of Justice, there has been prosecution of companies and individuals who have been involved in corrupt, practices. Now, what happens is that it doesn't matter whether the corruption itself took place within your jurisdiction, so long as you are a company that is covered by the particular legislation, in this instance, the FCPA. So an American company who gets involved in corrupt practices in Nigeria gets to be sanctioned in the US, as well as also being sanctioned in Nigeria. So that clearly again goes to show that corruption itself is quite an expensive business to be involved in. Next slide, please, Aaron. So, Nigeria's oil industry is an extremely interesting one. Like I had said, at the very beginning, we're one of the world's largest producers of crude oil. We had our difficulties during the COVID period, where not just Nigeria, but the entire world itself struggled with the low demand of for crude, which brought the price of crude back then in 2020 to something below $30. But times have changed, interestingly, even though we're not too happy with the circumstances that has brought about the change in the times, the war in Ukraine and Russia, and the various politics that has been going on, especially with regards to Russian oil to Europe. That has ensured that the global demand for oil itself has surged perhaps in the sense that you do not have that ready access which the Europeans have had before now to Russian oil. So the other countries in OPEC, which includes Nigeria, having to, in quote, catch in on that particular void that has been opened. So Nigeria currently has a quota which it is, has not been able to meet for various reasons. So its natural production as of June, that was just last month, was about 1.238 million barrels of oil per day. The sad thing in that statistics is that we have been informed that about 200,000 barrels of crude oil is lost every day to theft and vandalism. And the curious thing is that at one point we heard in the news, which was quite strange, that all the oil that was produced in a particular month was stolen, which is quite strange, but a bit more, on that, after now. So Nigeria is supposed to be, as they will say, ripping in all the benefits from the current increase in in the price of crude, which this morning was hovering. Brent was about $107 a barrel, but it's a reverse from what the Nigerian economy is facing. One of the reasons is that you have refineries which have been moribund for quite a number of years, and you have a system of importation of refined petroleum into the country. So the precious forex, which is supposed to be earned from this current windfall, is then being totally wiped off or used in the importation of refined petroleum, or for the payment of subsidies. And one interesting thing that has been happening in Nigeria is that a number of the IOCs have been involved in divestments from their onshore acreages, and these are being taken up by indigenous Nigerian companies. And we just also had concluded some few weeks ago a marginal oil-filled award round, which shows that the capacity to produce is going to increase substantially in the next in the coming days and months. Next slide, please, Aaron. So, one key thing that we need to emphasize in this discussion about the oil sector, which is the area which is perhaps greatly affected by the issue of corruption, is that there are specific areas where the problem itself manifests, or the areas which are more vulnerable to corruption. The first is in the award of oil exploration and production licenses, the award of contracts for the provision of various services. Bottlenecks and inefficiencies in government-company relations. I've referenced the issue of theft, of oil. And then one other key area where the problem persists is with regards to the allocation of licenses for the exporting of crude and the refining and importation of refined products. Next slide, Aaron. Thank you. So, I have mentioned before that the fight against corruption is not just being done at the global level of the UN with the laws that it has, the convention it has passed, or the African Union, or what we have seen in the international enforcement is done by America. Nigeria has also been able to prosecute individuals and companies who have been alleged to have been involved in corrupt practices. Well-known case is that involving some of the IOCs who were alleged to have paid money for an oil field into the private account of a former Minister of Petroleum Resources. And there are several other such high-profile cases which the Nigerian government has been prosecuting with some measure of success in some areas. Next slide, Aaron. So the issue of money laundering, it's one that is closely connected to the problem of corruption itself. And we have that peculiar situation here in Nigeria at the moment where there are incidents every now and then where people are kidnapped and ransom is demanded, and these monies are paid, and when people are paid money as a result of some corrupt inducement, as a result of someone demanding an all that, it creates avenues through which these ill-gotten monies are laundered. So it is a real problem which the Nigerian government has been trying to address, to stop the illicit flow of funds, to support terrorist acts, and also to ensure that these monies, which are the proceeds of corrupt acts, are also the flow of it is stemmed. Now, the interesting thing about Nigeria is that to a large extent there are areas that have not been reached by the by the commercial banks, and so it opens up a very important opportunity where fintechs have begun to plug into these areas and are indeed making a name for themselves. Now, the thing is that Lagos is perhaps arguably the hub for fintech in Africa, and with this boom in the fintech ecosystem, it has also brought again this whole problem of money laundering, because those who are indulging in these acts see it as an avenue where they can conveniently launder money. And we've had recent cases where some of these upstarts and those who are established for some time being the focus of investigation and of freezing of accounts. There are accounts in some countries here in Africa. Next slide, please, Aaron. So it's good to have something of, would one say, on a slightly lighter mood, since we're looking at this whole problem, which is not just corruption, money laundering, and anti-bribery. One of the perhaps endemic problems in Nigeria at the moment is this issue of online dating scam and internet, scam. It has perhaps gained such a notoriety and prominence that it is good to say something, cursorily on it whilst we're on these, subject. So just some very useful, tips in terms of being able to detect these sort of things and to ensure that you are not entrapped or you do not fall a victim. You should check and double check everything, especially when those emails drop in your box and you're saying the pictures attached to them. You should slow down and seek advice from someone you can trust, because when something appears too good to be true, it is most likely that it is not, good at all. Do not, for any reason, transfer money to anyone who you do not know, whether on a personal basis or on a business level. Someone you've met online. Do not for any reason transfer any money to anybody that you do not know, who solicits or gives some very fantastic story as to why they need the money or what they want to do. And report in the event that you might unwittingly or without having to consult anyone have made any transfers at all. Report any such thing to the agencies in Nigeria. The EFCC is again one of the bodies that deals with these matters, and it has been doing that in a very remarkable extent. It seems to have made quite a lot of inroads in trying to address these sort of criminal acts itself. Next slide, please, Aaron. Yes, so these online scams and romance scams, whether it's the online scam involving the business email compromise, which is a very popular one, and all that, it carries, hefty jail custodial sentence for those who are caught, in it. And since these, crimes usually are, interjurisdictional or interterritorial, it crosses across different jurisdictions. So you stand the chance of either being prosecuted in Nigeria or in the other country where your victim might be residing. Next slide, please, Aaron. So I'm sure some of us might be aware of the fact that whenever there is a fight against corruption or any known evil or malady or crime within a society, there will always be attendant challenges. And that is also the case with Nigeria. Now, one of the main problems with the fight against the corruption, bribery, money laundering in Nigeria is that it appears to a large extent that the agencies, the prosecuting agencies, do not have the necessary independence to be able to carry out their assignment. And that is a problem, because if an agency which is to prosecute criminals, whether they are public officials or they are private individuals, where the necessary independence is lacking, it creates quite a lot of problems. Now, another challenge with the enforcement of anti-corruption laws in Nigeria is the problem of politicization. And it's a real problem within the Nigerian landscape itself, because you find out that some of these agencies are meant to be a part or an arm or an agency under a particular arm of government. Now, where that is the case, it becomes quite difficult for these agencies to be able to carry out their responsibility, in an unbiased and impartial manner, especially where it has to do with corruption involving people within the particular area that they are under. Next slide, please, Aaron. Thank you. We're getting gradually to the end. Yes. Another major problem that we've seen with the enforcement of the anti-corruption laws is lack of diligent prosecution. It is amazing that in some cases you've had matters being prosecuted for 10, 15 years, and they're still going on. Poor sentencing procedures. Sometimes it is laughable when you see or hear about the sort of fines that are being handed down to individuals who have been involved in corruption of such staggering magnitude. So you can sentence someone who steals $10 million to 2 years imprisonment, and in some strange cases, you give the person an option of a fine. And a man who steals $1,000 is sentenced to 20 years imprisonment. We have such disconnect and often, this harmony in this sentencing rules and procedures for these sort of, crimes. Now, this is not a very good one, but the problem with the fight in Nigeria is that we have seen in a lot of areas that the judiciary is hampered in its ability to carry out its functions the way it should, perhaps because they do not have the requisite conducive environment in order to be able to do this, one of which is poor remuneration. We recently had a situation in Nigeria where the very top court itself, the Supreme Court, we have the justices of the court having to protest in court over their working conditions, which does not bode well at all for any sector or a body that has the functions to fight corruption. A major problem is, to a large extent, a lack of societal cooperation, and that has to do with a subject which perhaps is not strictly for these particular webinar. Ethnic considerations and affiliations and loyalties hamper the fight against corruption in Nigeria. Then there is the problem of poor staff training amongst those in these agencies who are supposed to be fighting this war. And we have a plea bargain system and a general systemic disorder, which sometimes will be somewhat frustrating. Next slide, please, Aaron. Thank you. So, it's very key with all that has been said. I know, like I said at the very beginning, it's a very wide subject. We've just tried to touch the fringes as much as we can within the time that we have. So in concluding, it's important to state that, like I did mention at the very beginning, if you want to come into the Nigerian market, the Nigerian environment, which is a very friendly and conducive and a comfortable one, you need to be able to do the necessary research that you have to do on your potential business partners. You have to have a very good anti-bribery, anti-money laundering policy internally. In Nigeria, we do not have any anti-bribery or anti-corruption policy handbook, but companies generally develop their own documents from what we have stated in the various regulations that we have that deals with these matters. You need to have good corporate governance. You need to ensure that you comply with the filings of your annual returns. And if you're able to do these little things, it will go quite a long way to ensure that you can do your business and sleep easy at night. Thank you very much. Dan, I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Fred. Before we move on to the Q&A, I just want to say thanks very much for that wonderful presentation. Really insightful. We got through a lot of information in that time, so that's fantastic. I'm sure our audience appreciated it. I know that you covered a lot, but if there is a question that you have for Fred, please do send it in now. We have a couple of questions that I want to ask before we wrap up, Fred, and we might be able to finish a few minutes early today. But our first question that we had in from the audience, please can you state specific corruption cases that Nigerians have brought in Nigerian courts? Hopefully these aren't EFCC or ICPC cases.
Thank you very much, Dan, for the question. Unfortunately, in Nigeria, corruption itself is an offense that is dealt with largely at a federal level. So where you have corruption cases, it is usually an agency of the government, such as, for instance, the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, which is empowered to bring these matters to the courts. I did mention about the commercial capital of Nigeria, Lagos, where they have passed their own local anti-corruption laws. So in that context, the officials of the state government that are given that particular responsibility can prosecute those matters. But it is not the case that individuals do go to court on their own to prosecute these matters. We haven't yet gotten to the level where these matters are dealt with at an individual level, because they're a crime against the state in the first instance.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Fred. I'm sure that has answered your question. To move on to our next question, is there an anti-bribery policy that companies need to have in place in Nigeria?
So, like I did hint at towards the closing of my presentation, we do not have any standard statutory templates that you might want to adopt. But since the issue of anti-bribery policy is a global one, the companies are free to devise and create their own internal documents. But again, in all the legislations that we have relating to anti-corruption and anti-bribery, you will definitely find pointers as to what should be the components of your own internal anti-bribery or anti-corruption policy.
Fantastic, thank you. That's really useful, Fred. What I want to sort of end on, and I can't see any more questions that we've had through at the moment, but of course, if you do have a question, please do send it in. Even if you want to reach out to Fred directly, we will send Fred's contact information, as well as Freshingfields Law contact information, over to you after this session. And in fact, we've just had a question through from Michael. Are there any tips you can give for a new entrant to the oil industry in Nigeria that can position the company as one which does not tolerate bribery? So just to repeat, any tips you can give for a new entrant to the oil industry in Nigeria that can position the company as one which does not tolerate bribery?
Yes, thank you very much, Michael, for that question. The first thing that I will say to you is that before you enter, or if you've entered into the country already, ensure that you have legal representation. And when I say legal representation, you should engage the services of a lawyer who has a very good understanding of the anti-corruption, anti-bribery laws of the country, because not all lawyers are experts in that area. Now, once you do have that, it will give you the necessary buffer and protection to be guided through the various loops that you will need to cross. Because as a new company coming into Nigeria, you'll be dealing with customs at some point, and the customs are notorious for their propensity to be corrupt. Perhaps that is something global. You'll be dealing with immigrations, you'll be dealing with different agencies. So get the services of a lawyer who understands this particular ecosystem itself and the landscape, that will be able to give you proper guidance and ensure that at each stage of your engagement with the government agencies, you have your complete documentation. Where you're short on documentation, you're going to be likely long on compromise.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Fred. Michael, I hope that that answered your question. We have, it's more, I think, a clarification that Tony is looking for, asking if in your presentation, 2% of GDP in bribery, is that data for the whole world or just in Nigeria?
Okay, 2%. What I had said there is the global cost of corruption, 1.5 to about $2 trillion. So not just for Nigeria. Nigeria doesn't even have the that much money, but it's a global statistics, not specific to Nigeria.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that, Fred. Brilliant. What I want to end today with is just to hand back to you, Fred, and just leave our audience with any key takeaways that you want them to leave today's session with.
Thank you very much. So again, It's been a pleasure having you all join. I know you have other things you might be doing at this time, so it is good for you to have set aside this 1 hour to listen to this presentation. Nigeria is a great place to do business. Nigeria has good regulations to protect all genuine businessmen and women who want to invest and also reap the fruits of their labor. Nigeria is a safe place to do business if you have the right person guiding and leading you through the various doors that you need to pass through in setting up your business. So do not always believe what you read in the international newspapers or what you watch on CNN or BBC or whatever it is. The country is a good place to do business, just like everybody else is facing. We're having one challenge or the other, but I believe that with the right mentality on the part of those who are coming to do business in Nigeria, and with the right help and assistance locally from lawyers and other professionals who have been trained in the best ethical standards globally, you will have those wrong impressions which you might have had before now about Nigeria totally erased. So I do hope that a little I've been able to present in an objective manner will not alarm you, but help you to see that in spite of what you might regard as some of the negative things going on here, there are quite a lot of interesting and attractive prospects. Thank you.
Fantastic, Fred. Some wise words to end on today. So thank you very much for that. And thank you again for your time and efforts today. A really fascinating presentation. I think that you have really sold to us the reasons for doing business in Nigeria. A fascinating place, a wonderful place to do business in, I'm sure. I hope that you watching today have taken those points from this presentation and that you will get in contact with Fresh in Fields Law, with Fred, to speak further after this webinar. We will send a recording and the contact information over to you. But for now, I want to say thank you for being here with us, and I hope you have a lovely rest of your day. Goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.